Well, that's the problem, Rory, is it's been a turning point since 2016. And they have adamantly refused to do serious changes. He's very charismatic, Kennedy-looking fella, and he votes against Israel. And he's a Southern senator. He's a charismatic senator. I mean, that gives me those Obama vibes. I expect, whether the Democrats drop the ball or not, I expect big Democratic victories in 2026 and 2028. The idea that you're just going to sort of be able to more of the sameness seems very unlikely.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Rory, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How are you this time?
Not bad, not bad. How you doing, Rory?
I'm not good. I'm just worried that you're used to a better sort of podcast intro.
Oh, yeah? Oh,
Just-
you're feeling bad. You're feeling
Yes.
jealous. You shouldn't, Rory. You
I
shouldn't.
thought my intros were good, but now I seen it was like you were a wrestler. It was epic.
Yeah. So I went on the Asa Park podcast. The podcast seems to be like he's still trying to get it off its feet, but Asa Park,
He's Norwegian, isn't he?
I believe, is Norwegian, and he's got it seems like he's got a very successful YouTube channel talking about music industry, this, that, and the other thing. And I was one of an early guests on a fledgling podcast, but hoo-wee, has he got an editing team? It's fun to check out the early minutes of that. But I think he's probably got, I assume he's got like a team of editors. Really.
Wow.
So not a one-man show like yourself. So I wouldn't get too worried.
Would you like to talk about a party that feels like a one-man show at the minute because there's an elderly man running around America doing his best for that party that seems like they despise him?
Well, it's the party he's not even technically a part of, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders, is he even technically a Democrat at this point?
Okay, is he like a bizarro? Because he was an independent for the longest time and then was like, I'll join the Democrats.
I don't
So was
think he
he
ever
back into being
joined.
independent?
I think he was always an independent. I think he just ran in the primary. I think that was something that you were allowed to do. I don't think Bernie ever became a Democrat, because I think he'd be embarrassed to be a Democrat, though he has been a lot quieter about saying that for the past decade or so. So today, we're going to talk about Democrats in disarray, the Democratic Party. And it is very clear to me, and I think to most others, that there's just, the Democrats aren't happy. They aren't popular, and they aren't
Yes.
happy.
But it feels like they may still just win because they're not Trump.
Yes, and I think that's a key part of the sort of the base layer of this discussion. I think that it's very tempting for a lot of people to say, Democrats have to revolutionize this, that, and the other thing. They have to do this, that, and the other thing. And it's entirely possible that the Democrats, fine, I don't agree with this, but I think you can make a case that the Democrats are just fine. They just need to not try to run a genocidal geriatric machine politician like Joe Biden, or the woman who was specifically picked as his vice president so as to not be politically threatening. So I think that is an important way to launch into any discussion of the Democratic Party, is that it hasn't had an attractive candidate running for it since 2012.
Apparently, Obama wanted them to run, a very quick campaign to see who should be the leader. That's come out recently, which is bizarre. That, was it basically all because of Biden didn't want one? What was the full story?
The full story, I couldn't imagine what goes through the heads of these people. But it does seem that Biden might have been pressured by some other people. Some people felt that maybe it would have been disrespectful to Kamala. Maybe Biden wanted somebody who could lose. I think Joe Biden is easily the most, I don't think he's necessarily the most destructive, but he's definitely the most personally monstrous of any president this century. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if, when he was forced to give up power, if he was like, well, great, I hope they lose, and went with Kamala. I couldn't tell you. And one of the great things about politics in 2025, Rory, is that we don't have to think about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris anymore.
No.
Other than to say that, ludicrously, some people are still trying to make Kamala happen.
Really?
And
Because I don't even think she thought she was the best for it, but it was a bit like, Well, I've been told to, and I'm vice president.
Oh, I would never underestimate the personal self-regard of anybody who's going to put themselves up for election at any level. So I'm sure that she would love to be president. I'm sure still, but I don't think I would hope that people would prevail upon her to not try to make that happen.
The American economy has to be completely in the toilet to fulfill the Simpsons prophecy.
What's the Simpsons prophecy?
Do you remember how they basically remember when Lisa? It's supposed to be in the year 2010, which was
The far future,
the far
yes.
future at the time. And Lisa becomes president, and she's supposed to be like a Hillary Clinton type. And she goes,
As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke.
The country is broke.
Yeah. That's yeah. That's disturbingly plausible. It won't be Kamala Harris in 2028, but the chances are very, very high, and getting higher by the moment that Donald Trump wields power, that it will be a Democrat. So the stakes.
well, also, well, sorry to interrupt, but in the America's 51st state, we've seen anyone associated with Trump not doing well, with Mark Carney winning.
Yes, that was kind of a fascinating. So apparently, up until Donald Trump started talking about invading Canada, Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party was expected. And I mean, in the natural course of politics, that should have been the appropriate thing to
This
happen.
may be
I
like
mean,
one of the biggest upsets in political history.
it's a big deal. The Liberals
Because,
had,
well, Trudeau had been in for, 3 terms, so quite often the electorate gets bored. He was very unpopular. They were doing very badly in the polls. And Mark Carney apparently is a very cunning man. He used to be in charge of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. So for a foreigner to be in charge of the Bank of England, you'd assume you'd had to be damn good.
that is a fascinating dynamic that I know nothing about. I certainly remember hearing about Mark Carney as being in charge of the Bank of England, but the scale of the upset is that you were pointing to, just the Liberals had, like the Conservatives in the UK, had just been in power for way too long, so it would have been natural to switch over to the Conservatives. But Donald Trump personally, and I think he's even acknowledged it in a couple quotes, sunk the Conservative Party. And the Mark Carney, who I think you can make a creditable case for being a much more interesting candidate than Trudeau was. But yeah, I mean, there's a fascinating
And
example.
a much smaller but similar thing may happen in Australia. With their Liberal Party is like the Conservative Party. It's a bit confusing. So the Labour Party may win because they were very anti-Trump. Although the stakes are significantly lower because Australia isn't going to be invaded, as far as we're aware.
Chances are low. Chances are low. One never knows in the Trump
One
era.
never knows. Podcast update. Labour won in a landslide in the Australian election. They needed 76 to win and they got 86, while the Conservatives are down to 80 seats and Peter Dutton lost his seat. So, good news for Albanese.
I think it is a good baseline to establish. It's not as much as I would like a dramatic change to the Democratic Party. And as many other people would like the Democratic Party, it is I think, very worth pointing out.
What is a dynamic change? Like, what year would you have to go back to say that would be a dynamic, or is this an era of the Democrats that has never been?
Well, the history does not repeat. History does not. But if we were to look at that framework, I'd kind of like to go back to like the 1972 Democratic Party. Of course, what would that be? McGovern.
So before Carter.
What's that? Before Carter, sure. McGovern, of course, was not a big winner. This is the guy who I think lost to Nixon in an absurd landslide. Of course, he was also very anti-war. So, I kind of like, maybe we should give McGovern another look.
Well, I say we should have Al Gore go again.
Well, yeah, and isn't he younger than Trump?
Yeah, but most people are.
Yes, that's true. Most people are. I just wanted to say at the outset that you can make a case that a Democratic Party with somebody who was, charismatic, not flagrantly corrupt. I don't think Kamala was that corrupt because she just sort of never had to be. Would be a good step, and perhaps today's Democratic Party could win in 2026 and 2028 under that kind of leadership. However, I think we are, and I think most people would probably agree, even if they're not acting on it. I think most people would agree that we're in a time of transition in U.S. politics. I mean, the advent of Donald Trump himself, the destruction of the Republican Party, what it used to stand for. It's clear that there's a thirst for things that the current party system is not providing. I think the political science consensus, or at least popular political science consensus, is that what we have from Ronald Reagan on is sort of the sixth party system in the United States, and the sixth party system is on its last legs. So while I do think that it is entirely credible, like what would be like the change nothing, be vaguely charming choice for the Democratic Party, like Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan seems to really be embarrassing herself recently. She keeps showing up for Trump events and like smiling on the stage when he says awful things.
Pete Buttigieg, would he be?
Yes, I think Pete Buttigieg. Well, I think I used to be very anti-Pete Buttigieg, would still never be my choice, because of his lifestyle. As a McKinsey Harvard person, I am bigoted against McKinsey Harvard people, not against gay people, but McKinsey Harvard people, I'm pretty bigoted against. But I think that he is such a compelling speaker, and I think I think at the Department of Transportation under Biden, he started building the case that he could be not just a Harvard McKinsey guy. So yeah, I'm open
And
to
I think
Buttigieg.
he's got weirdly popular at the minute because he was on quite a right-wing podcast and was well spoken on it and said things like, "Wouldn't it be nice if the basic things for poor people worked?"
Well, that's the classic Buttigieg. Like because that's how he went from the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, to a plausible presidential candidate to transportation secretary with Biden. I mean, he's a guy. Is he 40 yet? I think he's probably
42.
He's just in his 40s. And the reason is because he's excellent in every media. And yeah, that's something the Democrats haven't had since 2012 either, is somebody who can actually speak publicly in a way that is coherent and compelling. You'd think that'd be a baseline.
But he's fairly generic Democrat, wouldn't he be? But just charismatic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, I think he's a chameleon. I think that Biden, leaving the genocide aside, was absolutely more of what we needed, more of a swerve towards FDR, towards post-Reaganism, not anywhere near as much as we needed, but like more of a swerve towards that than we'd seen from the Democratic Party since Jimmy Carter. And that wasn't because Biden, had virtuous ideas and knew it was the right way to head. It was because that's where he could see his party was moving, and he followed them there. Like Pete Buttigieg is 42. He's going to be a political figure who could potentially be president, well, for another 40 years. I would hopefully say just for another 30 years, to get Biden at Trump's age. It's 40 years from now he could still be at it. And I don't think he's ever going to go be a Republican or start a new party. I think Pete Buttigieg will always be a Democrat and will be a Democratic contender for president for the next 3 decades. And wherever the party moves, I think Buttigieg will move there. Whereas people in their 50s, their 60s are a little less able to do that. I think Cory Booker is a great example of somebody who's just a little too rooted in what the Democratic Party used to be. Cory Booker is the senator from New Jersey. He was the guy who was going to be the mayor who cleaned up Newark, and then he failed to clean up Newark, and then he moved into the Senate, and I guess he's still trying to help Newark or whatever. But he's a African-American gentleman who's, very charismatic, and people have had high hopes for him for a while. But he's just such a classic, a lot like Kamala Harris herself, just such a classic, like neoliberal, like business, hench person for business type of guy. He did this very charismatic, very impressive seeming 25-hour, I think they call it a filibuster. Like he spoke to try to block something on the Senate floor for 25 hours. And clearly, man, there was something with him and the representative, the ranking Democratic guy in the Senate, just sort of doing a sit-in on the steps. He's doing the sort of performative stuff that's good. But after his 25-hour filibuster, the next day he went into Congress and voted to give a whole bunch more money and weapons to Israel. So yeah, this is
Brilliant.
not actually, this is, I think he's so Buttigieg is young enough and he's already, because he's real smart, has already put like the baseline in place at his time at transportation to be like, no, I'm a Democrat who actually believes in government again. So I could see.
But
I
he's
think
off a political family as well. Was his father a governor of
Buttigieg.
Kentucky? Yeah.
Really?
The son of a popular former Kentucky governor.
Are you talking about Bashir?
Oh, I am. Apologies.
Yeah. So, no, Buttigieg, I thought his father was a professor or something,
Mm-hmm.
which might have something to do with just how well-spoken and how, well-read he is. So Buttigieg, I mean, I don't know. I think that Buttigieg could very plausibly end up as president. In fact, that's probably likely, whether it's in 2028 or some other time.
Okay.
So, but I think just to go to that baseline point, like, I think that the Democrats, if they could just have somebody who can complete a sentence and doesn't have like endless skeletons in their closet, is not
Mhm.
like personally annoying to be around, they are very likely to win dramatically in 2028 and in 2026. However, in this, okay, the party system is ending context, okay, we have to figure out what's next. That's not enough. It's not good enough. I think that we've been in this context, certainly in the Trump era, where, yeah, a Democrat or a Republican wins. That's generally what has to happen, but they do so with dramatically less popularity each and every time. The dynamic for at least the past 3 elections was, who do you hate more, rather than who do you actually want to. And that's always a dynamic in politics, especially for people
Yeah, the least worst.
especially for people who are like more engaged, but usually among like the American public more broadly, people who watch cable news and like vaguely, pay attention for once every 4 years, like they actually like the people they're voting for. And that hasn't really been the dynamic for the past 3 presidential elections. And that is certainly, part of that is definitely how contemptible all of these characters have been, Biden, Harris, Trump, Clinton. But it is a lot to do with how little either of the parties offer anymore. So I would argue that the secret to what's next, who's going to like formulate the next party system in the United States, is figuring out who does a better job of figuring out what's after Reaganism. And that doesn't mean we have to go back to FDR. That doesn't mean we have to go back to like exactly what we had before Reaganism. But I do think it's going to look more like the FDR consensus than it looks like the Reagan consensus.
Well, I think simply you can always see that like sometimes you can have things too weighted towards labor, and then other times weighted too much into finance. But we've been far too heavily into finance for far too long. And it's time
100%.
to just bring things down to 60s, 70s levels.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. What exactly that looks like?
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know. But it definitely, that's the direction you're heading in. And so the thing about a party system is that a party system gets run by one of the parties, or one of the parties sets the tone for that party system. In this party system we've been leaving, it's 100% Ronald Reagan. Obama and the Clintons were basically just finding different ways to do Ronald Reagan's agenda, even if they weren't Republicans. In the last one, it was FDR, a Democrat, that sort of set the tone for, even for people like Eisenhower and Nixon, who were Republicans. They were mostly sort of doing FDR stuff. And when a party gets to set the tone for a party system, it means that, like, generally speaking, their guys win more. Throughout the FDR era into the 1990s, the Democrats just owned Congress most of the time. It's been the Republicans most of the time since 1992. And then when a president comes in, they're more reacting and like trying to carve off and make more successful the policies of the dominant party. So if the Democrats want to be the dominant party of the next party system, they got to figure out how to revise Reaganism, how to go back against Reaganism, and the idea that you're just going to sort of be able to more of the sameness seems very unlikely.
Because there's very little meat in those bones, it seems, to keep going back to Reaganism.
Yeah, it's the cupboard is bare, Rory.
Mm-hmm.
The
and
cupboard
I
is
think that America have was it this quarter? Not quite a recession.
Today's
but
news, right?
Yes.
I wasn't following that, but it does look, the U.S. GDP is not looking super healthy. I'll confess that I've not The data on that sort of data I've always found confusing, and I have to like spend 5 to 10 minutes solidifying in my head exactly what
Yeah.
they're saying, and I've not done that work.
U.S.
But,
economy shrinks for the first quarter.
there we go. That's well, the thing is that wasn't. I mean, that's Donald Trump's tariffs. Actually, no, I don't think it is yet. No, well, it was Donald Trump instability because the first
Yes.
quarter is before Liberation Day, I think.
Mhm.
But it is definitely Trumpian chaos, which is.
But also, it seems like a lot of ships aren't arriving now because when the tariffs were being talked about, they didn't know what was happening. So it talks about certain ports are empty or significantly less. And I think the biggest one was the solar panels. I seen someone wanted to buy a solar panel, it was $40, and it was charging them over $1,000.
What?
So yeah, because Chinese solar panels have a crazy tariff that's like 1,000% or something.
Oh, really? I thought it was just 200 or 300%. But wow, that's crazy.
Oh yeah, specifically Chinese solar panels. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty. Things are just kicking in.
Yeah, it is a mess. That is.
So you may need to have someone with as ambitious as FDR to fix a lot of this.
I mean, I maintain. Well, of course, the more things get screwed up, Rory, you're absolutely right. The more work is going to have to be done.
But are we getting, sorry to butt in, but quite often after World War II, a lot of cities are destroyed. So quite often then is your time to do something. We're going to plan this, we're going to plan that. Is it possible Trump destroys America so much that it's like, we have to do something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, that's the accelerationist case, which I've always been against.
Oh, yes, horrendous.
But yeah, that does seem like a plausible case for where we might be by 2026, 2028. And I think that's kind of Donald Trump has been a great humiliation for the United States, a great humiliation for the Democratic Party, but has been kind of a gift for the Democratic Party in that he is so much more a humiliation for the Republican Party. And we've been doing this for like a decade now, and we've seen over and over and over again that Donald Trump is he's a political genius in his presentation and is like a unique force. And from DeSantis to a wide array of psychos who nobody remembers anymore, lots and lots of people have tried to do Trumpism without Trump. And it and it just hasn't worked. It's fallen
he
flat.
definitely has the rock star ability, which is if you try to imitate him, no, you can't do it. Only Trump can be Trump.
Yeah, and it just doesn't work. And J.D. Vance is probably just another example of this. So this has given the Democrats the breathing space to actually figure out what's next for themselves as a party, to try to position themselves to define the next era of the next 40 years of U.S. politics. And in 2016, 2020, and 2024, they have failed miserably.
What can you see the Democrats doing if Trump does try to run again for a third time?
Well, then you can run Obama. And that would be...
Well, he said the loophole he's going for is concurrent. Because Trump was in, then out, then in. He's claiming that he can then run again because Obama went back to back.
You
think at that point, just feck it, get Obama in?
Well, no, because so that I think would be plausible, but Obama hasn't been president since 2016.
Oh, no, but they're saying when he was president 2 times in a row.
Yeah, but
I'm just...
That would be... If you were going to make a constitutional amendment to allow like a third... I think he'd just run Obama and he'd win. I mean, Obama is so much more popular than any Democratic or Republican politician that's left. I don't think that'd be a good thing, frankly. I'm not. I mean, yeah, I think Obama would win. And I think, frankly, the fact that Obama is so young and so present is actually kind of a great bar against, them getting clever like that, because I think Republicans acknowledge that the guy's just really popular. And, it's not necessarily that things were, this is something this is a realization from one's 40s. It's not necessarily that things were so much better under Obama. Like the economy under the entire Obama administration was recovering very anemically from the 2008 financial crisis. But you know what? Everybody was like, was like 10 years younger back then. So, so we remember
Well,
it.
that is a fact.
So we remember it. So like, oh man, 10 to like what? 10 to like 17 years younger, man. Crap, man. Yeah, when Obama was elected, I was 29.
Wow.
Do you know how few back pains I had? Do you know how little I cared about anything back then? Yeah, so like I think that Obama would clean Donald Trump's clock. Donald Trump continuing to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party has been this extraordinary gift to the Democrats. And I think it's kind of their last chance. Like they have failed to meet the moment, or really failed to pick up the gift that Donald Trump has been giving them since 2015. And if they don't figure it out in the next 4 years, then I would be very highly surprised if it were to be J.D. Vance himself, but somebody else will come up and pick up the standards. So whoever follows Donald Trump in the Republican Party will not have his raw political skill, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true, charisma that Donald Trump has, but what they might have that you see the intimations of in the actions and things that people like J.D. Vance or Hawley say is an actual political program that actually appeals to people, that actually has suggestions of what the United States might focus on and do next. And the Democrats like, oh, I'm just going to find another banking lobbyist to put up, isn't going to do so well against that. And I think that if the Democrats squander this 4-year cycle, as they squandered the 2 4-year cycles beforehand, they're going to potentially come up against the Republican Party that has an idea or two, or something that it might want to do, because it's clear that only on the level of rhetoric, but very firmly on the level of rhetoric, the Republican Party seems a lot more interested in abandoning pro-business fundamentalism than the Democratic Party has at this point. And that's a real risk for the Democrats, because I think moving beyond pro-business fundamentalism, finding out what's next after that, and I think figuring out how to make government work better is where the next dominant party of the next party system is coming from. And post-Trump, the Republicans might actually start working on that. And if the Democrats don't have a credible answer to that, then we're screwed.
What Democrats have you seen coming up with things like that?
Well, so there's two, I think perhaps a little unfairly, like there's this sort of two opposed ideas that we're seeing. The most compelling approaches in the aftermath, or basically in this first Trump moment, you have, as we opened up talking about Bernie Sanders and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think they call it barnstorming. Is that what they call it? They are running around the country. They spoke to 30,000 people in Los Angeles,
But I think also they're specifically picking Republican states.
Well, so they're going everywhere. So in Los Angeles, they got 30,000 people. But as you said, in Republican states, in Utah, they got like 20,000 people. They filled an arena and then had overflow with jumbotrons in red states.
Yeah.
And the theme that they're going for, which I think is incredibly valuable and absolutely should be probably the main focus electorally, is against oligarchy. And to the point where some Democrats are whining about it. Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan was like, nobody knows what an oligarch is, or whatever. And I think everybody knows what an oligarch is. And the problem for a lot of more established people in the Democratic Party is that they rely on oligarchs. Mark Cuban, Reid Hoffman, that is something that they are very nervous about, the idea, as they've been nervous since Bernie Sanders, was so successful in the primary against Hillary Clinton. And then in 2020, they absolutely sabotaged Bernie Sanders' rush for the nomination for Joe Biden to horrific effect. But yeah, they really, really hate the idea of going after oligarchy. But I think that is 100% finding somebody to be angry at, finding somebody to penalize, finding somebody to tax.
Do you find there's a lot more hatred towards billionaires? Because I keep hearing the term billionaire class, and it's sort of hard to be like, yeah, we should give billionaires more money and power.
Well, so it's kind of crazy. this has been in the air, I think, since 2011. But before the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, like it was so, and perhaps this is just me being blinkered or whatnot, but generally speaking, like people just didn't talk about inequality. People didn't talk about like those were old, that's old socialist talk. Who needs to think about that at all? And I think absolutely over the past 4 or 5 years, and I think the very real sense that the oligarch class, the billionaires, inflicted Donald Trump on us this time around, that growing sense is definitely making people angry.
And also at his inauguration, where it's just, here's 4 billionaires right beside him.
Yeah. Well, one of the very key parts of Donald Trump's appeal is growing anger at big tech. Big tech does this to conservatives, big tech, and then to have an inauguration where, I don't know, 4 of the 5 representatives of 4 of the 5 biggest companies are just sitting there being like, yeah, we love this.
And then you let a billionaire try to take away everyone's pension.
Well, this is a key tension. Exactly. And this is a key tension here. Like that, I think it is true, as like Matt Iglesias or David Shore or what have you would tell you, that the United States is fundamentally a pretty conservative, pretty pro-wealth place. It's just the way we're wired. It is, we've got a lot of space. We've got traditionally, we've got a lot of, like the whole real estate industry is just built to allow people to build up little fiefdoms that like convince themselves that they're clever capitalists and this, that, and the other thing when they're just sort of landlords. But there's more of a scope for that. And that's not just owning land. There's a lot of other things that give a lot of scope for the idea that, we're all entrepreneurs in America and we're all the masters of our own domain. And if you fail, it's because you suck. And if you're really successful, it's because you're amazing and it's justice. And this, like, you can go back to like the Protestant work ethic or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But that is very deeply rooted in U.S. culture, U.S. approaches to things. And man, like if you want to break that fundamental culture, there's no better man to do it than Donald Trump.
Yes.
Because he's just so loathsome, so corrupt, so clearly devoid of any
Also,
talent
have you
or
heard
success.
about his Trump coin? There's a weird, like, it's like a sequel to Trump coin. It's the Solana network. Apparently, what they're doing is whoever are the top 25 people that have bought the Trump coin get to meet Donald Trump. So basically, just the more bribery you give, you get to meet Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible and is obviously, well, it's surprise, and I think actually I know why, but there's very straightforward part of the Constitution, I think, that forbids emoluments or what. It's essentially just the president shouldn't be bribed, or U.S. government people shouldn't be bribed. And maybe I'm sure there's some, as there always is, some kind of constitutional or legal minutia that makes this not as directly applicable. But I do think we could have tried harder to go after Donald Trump for basic bribery. I still can't get over the Trump Hotel. In Washington, D.C., there was a hotel where inexplicably the Trump organization that had no history with historic preservation was awarded during the Obama administration by the Democratic GSA as he was doing a birther controversy against Obama. My theory is that this was Hillary Clinton's bribe to get Donald Trump to run. But that's about my sort of conspiracy theory. But it is indisputed that there was a Trump hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue in a historic post office that was run during the first Trump term and was mostly patronized for events and hotel stays by large corporations and large governments who wanted to influence Donald Trump. Just flagrant corruption that absolutely should have been prosecuted. But I really think that too many Washington, D.C. Democrats and lobbyists
or something similar
and systems, we're just like, we don't really, can't we just make something out of this Russia bullshit so we don't have to talk about the UAE or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Israel and the ways that they're funding us and all our sinister stuff in similar ways.
And Ireland, I think it's one of the big lobbies.
100%. And the Norwegians, Singapore, like anybody with money pours a lot of it into bribery in Washington, D.C. And certainly nothing was on the scale of or as transparent as Trump's hotel in Washington, D.C. Oh, yeah, by the way, the hotel closed like 3 months after he left office because, that was the point.
Yeah,
Was
but
to
why
take
would you want to
bribes.
stay in Washington if Trump's not there? Like,
Yeah,
there just
sure.
wasn't many tourists about.
Right. Yeah. Extraordinarily. Well, since even the Trump organization didn't think they'd be able to come back after January 6th, but turns out they underestimated the old man.
Can you see China putting pressure on America to have a better welfare state? You talked about how quite often during the Soviet Union, America had to sort of pretend to care about the poor and have some sort of welfare state. Can you see, now that we're seeing a lot of, China's high-speed rail and China has free healthcare and China has this, and the fact that it's just so easy to see it now with the likes of TikTok, can you see America moving to sort of, we have to match China by making our own high-speed rail or whatever?
Well, the problem is that, there are a lot of problems. The problem is that China actually doesn't have that involved a social welfare state itself, actually. Weirdly, the United States has a much more generous system of welfare provision and healthcare for the elderly, at least, than communist China does, which is just sort of an interesting detail. But I think there is so much scope for U.S. and Chinese competition to play out in a positive way, like actual competition, trying to do things. The problem is that so much of the U.S. system is still captured by oligarchs. Like I think it would be an overstatement to say that China is beating the U.S. on AI, but they are advancing in leaps and bounds and, having a great success on a whole range of levels because they're not as beholden to oligarchs and trying to make money off them. I think
Do you think, I know it's a sort of horrific thing that what happened to the CEO of Alibaba, but do you think the state should control its billionaires rather than the billionaires controlling the state they're in?
Yes, unreservedly. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's not that's not a socialist, that's not a new idea. Like the idea, like the fact that billionaires exist comes after consolidated state power. And I think people don't really appreciate that. Like, yes, like absolutely, there's sort of oligarchs and billionaires in the United States. I don't know, was Rockefeller ever technically a billionaire? Probably, I don't know.
Oh yeah, if you added it into today's dollars.
Well,
or
certainly
whatever.
in today's dollars. But the robber barons in sort of 1880s, 1890s would have been impossible without the context of the United States operating a patent system, the United States funding like all of the railroad networks that eventually made these people wealthy. Like the idea of a billionaire, the idea of the oligarch, a wealthy person on this level that isn't, the king or the whatnot, is a response to government. It comes out of government. It's not like they just sort of naturally, and this is, we talk about
create themselves.
Yeah, and this is part of the mythology that, say, Elon Musk believes that, it's just these like superheroes or what. No, like the rich people come from the government, and the government should absolutely, as it did up until the 1970s, take steps to make certain that no billionaire acquires enough power to control the government. And that is something that our system has really failed to do since the 1970s and 1980s. So yeah, absolutely government should control billionaires. I think, was it Bernie who always used to say that like every billionaire is a policy failure? And I'm not sure I believe that. Like, but certainly this level of billionaires and this level of power for billionaires is a profound policy failure. So anyway, so we talked about, we've given Bernie his due, and then there's the other half, which is these are sort of, if not them in particular, these are sort of ideologically close to the kinds of people who say, the U.S. public is too conservative, the Democrats need to focus on being more conservative, this, that, and the other thing. And these guys are sort of, very close to similar circles, similar publications. And this is the abundance agenda from Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. So I got to say, I was initially a lot more hostile to this abundance agenda before I sat down and read the book. I am still much more on the Bernie side of things than the abundance side of things. I think that these guys are thinking about and thinking in serious ways about the problems of having a government that that provides things, that actually does things functionally, this type of thing. I think these guys are thinking along those lines, but I think that their thinking is still very limited. I think Zephyr Teachout went on Ezra Klein's podcast. I haven't listened to that yet. I don't know how successful she was, but I would definitely lean more towards Zephyr Teachout, who's saying that, yes, there absolutely are burdens to good government. There are obstacles to making just more successful governance more broadly. These guys are pointing towards regulation. These guys think we need more deregulation. And I would submit at this point that that is nuts. They absolutely point to specific regulations that need to be rolled back, that need to be dealt with. But the idea that we need a broader, more pro-business, anti-regulation, anti-government sense, I think it is not unfair to portray Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's abundance approach as basically being like a democratic libertarianism. I think that these guys grew up in New York and California. They do have, they'll throw in an example from Montana or what have you there and again. But I think abundance is 100% what California and New York and plausibly Chicago desperately need. These politics, these solutions, just as I'm sick of Anglo-Saxon economics and Reaganism for the United States and the UK, but maybe France could use a little more of it. Maybe Argentina could use a little bit more of it. New York and California could probably still use a little bit more, pro-business fundamentalism, could use deregulation, could use the ability, letting capital free to actually do things and build things. I agree. I think on a national level, this is a big loser. And I don't think you're going to zoning reform. It's not really, I don't think that's going to, I think in 2026 and 2028, that will absolutely do it as long as you are actually putting forward attractive people, which the Democratic Party hasn't done yet. But as far as the basis of the next system, no. I think there's a case to be made, and I think I'll probably do it in an upcoming video, that you take abundance at the local level, the New York, California level, and then put anti-oligarchy at the top level. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I think it's a little unfair to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, the way that this has been used. So this book is very carefully researched, very carefully laid out. It's not particularly new ideas. Like Matt Iglesias, who is a sort of famously snarky thinker, has been pushing very similar ideas to this for a decade, not in this carefully marketed a way. So I don't know if Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias famously are bloggers. So they're young wonderkins who are maybe 3 or 4 years younger than me, which means they're not that young anymore. And Ezra Klein is the sort of I think he's kind of described now as kind of like a nerdy sex symbol. He's got a podcast at the New York Times. He was the guy who founded Vox. And Matt Iglesias is kind of his snarky, snide sidekick or what have you. So basically what abundance is sort of taking the snarky snide ideology and then putting it into a more carefully marketed, let's actually take this seriously and try and push it forward kind of way. And this is a book. They put a lot of effort in this. They put a lot of time into this. This is a book that was meant to launch in March of 2025. And I think it was meant to launch in the fifth year of the Biden administration, or in the first year of the Kamala Harris administration. This project that they were already working on was meant to be a strong suggestion to the brand new or brand renewed Democratic administration. And I think it makes a ton of sense as that. I think that's a good thing for this to be. But as it's being marketed now, as it being pushed forward as the Democrats' pathway to electoral success, I think it's a little bonkers on the national level anyway.
So you think it's definitely this is a turning point. The Democrats have to be different from here on in?
Well, that's the problem, Rory, is it's been a turning point since 2016.
Yeah.
And they have adamantly refused to do serious changes. And if we're going to shocked, and it is a failure on our part, but we are not going to be a failure on the part of the way that almost every mass media, New York Times, what have you, think piece has failed since the election. We're only going to make it 3/4 of the way through our program without mentioning Gaza. Whereas I read so many, I read 2 or 3 New York Times think pieces this morning about what's wrong with the Democratic Party. Why did we lose? What was the big problem? And they just did not mention Gaza.
Oh, yeah.
They just did not. They did not mention foreign policy. It was actually, I read one New York Times one, it was the most recent one, and they did mention Gaza because Trump had done something crazy about Gaza. Like they did mention Gaza. And I was like, great. But like, they did not mention that, like, in this, like, why the Democrats have done so poorly, like this whole like thing, like they did not mention that at all.
So you think the Democrats didn't support Israel enough?
That is actually,
you do hear that.
Yeah, you really do. Brett Steffens in the New York Times in particular, that was actually very clarifying for me. Look, I think you can make a very firm claim that in 2020, and this does provide clips that are not helpful for a lot of Democratic politicians, which would actually be easily surmountable by like an Obama or like a Clinton or a Gore or, someone who's capable of expressing themselves. Like Buttigieg doesn't appear to be hampered by it a little bit. But in 2020, with the fever of the reaction against Trump, with the peak of wokeness, with the peak of all that, like a lot of Democratic political figures said things that were alarming to people who are not as progressive in the rest of the country. And it was somewhat weaponized against, it was certainly weaponized against Kamala. I don't think Kamala said anything that was pro-trans for 4 years. But she absolutely said things that were very pro-trans in 2020, and they were constantly rehashed. And maybe courageously, she refused to back off of that. I don't know like why that was the thing she had to be courageous about. She wouldn't, she wouldn't renounce a genocide, but she couldn't like be a little bit, suspicious on trans things. I don't know. So, but there's still people who, and it was very clarifying for me this morning to see Brett Steffens, who is basically the New York Times House Republican and certainly like their House hyper-Zionist. Anything for Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was very instructive, I think, to see that he was the guy really banging the drum. And of course, Bari Weiss of the Free Press is another famous example of this, really heavily banging the drum for, the Democrats were too woke and too pro-trans and this, that, and the other thing. And I don't think that Kamala or Biden or any 2024 Democrat was too woke or too trans, frankly. There were clips.
They were dragging their heels quite a lot. They just, compared to Trump, most people are pro-trans.
Yeah, they didn't renounce their, no, I mean, like, honestly, in the United States, like, I think that was effective messaging. Like, I found myself in a context with a bunch of 50-something, Midwesterners types, and not like rednecks, not like whatever. And they were a little, like, it was effective messaging for them. They wouldn't go out and march about it, but they're like, yeah, just, why do we have to have a gay pride day at work? This, that, and the other thing. Not defending that at all, but I'm saying it was like somewhat effective messaging. But I do think that the people who are like, it was too much trans, it was too progressive. The fact that Brett Steffens is shouting that is like, so what that's code for was you care about Gaza too much. I think that not only they're not mentioning Gaza or Palestine at all in losing this election for Biden and Kamala. And like, I'm not someone who thinks that like it was entirely because of Gaza. But absolutely, it was a huge factor in the Democrats' loss.
And it was at least 2%?
2%. Yeah, 2% that lost them that. And and I would argue vastly more than that. All of the activists, people are like, it's funny, we have actually got a lot of protests in like a developing protest culture in the United States against Donald Trump, but it's mostly old people. It's fascinating.
Is it because they went after pensions and stuff? Or
what's that?
Another way Doge was like taking away people's pensions.
Well, I think that's certainly part of it. The key thing, Rory, is that all the young people went out and all the young people who were likely to protest, which is a subset of Americans, which is also a subset of usually Democratic Party activists, that's very important, went out and protested the genocide in 2024, and the Democratic president encouraged their persecution and called them anti-Semites. And that in and of itself was an incredible pain point. The fact that Joe Biden was more abjectly bloodthirsty than any U.S. president. Like, U.S. presidents having to deal with Israeli governments that want to go out and do mass murder is not a new dynamic. And every president, Republican and Democratic, since there's been in Israel, has distinguished themselves as more of a humanitarian, caring more about Palestinian lives than Joe Biden. By far. Like, by far. The fact that nobody can even acknowledge that, A, Joe Biden's heartless love of genocide played a really big role in the Democratic Party losing to Donald Trump, and the Israeli government's like full-throated support for the Republicans, or despite that, played a role. Like, that is something that people really need to start reckoning with a lot more honestly, to say the very, very least. And I guess, we should close by, perhaps, have you got a pick for the next leader of the Democratic Party, Rory?
Well, I feel like the most boring and safe one that might actually do something is the one you were talking about, Pete Buttigieg. I feel like he's the most likely because he can get that sort of progressive ticket being gay whilst he doesn't scare people on TV because he's not black or a woman, which a lot of Americans aren't ready for.
Yeah, I think that's. But
it's hard to argue with AOC if I was going with my heart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My heart is with AOC as well. I do think not necessarily because she's a woman. I'm certain that's part of it. I do question whether the way that she is positioned currently is too progressive. But I mean, hell, I think Bernie would have won.
It's the time for it.
Yeah. Right. I mean, who knows? I actually have sort of a random answer, but like I really like John Ossoff, who is a Georgia senator, is very young. That's important. I think we'd agree. Very young is good.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody, I was kind of interested in Chris Van Hollen, who is both one of the best U.S. senators on Palestine, and he's a Maryland senator, and really distinguished himself by going down to El Salvador. Basically going down to El Salvador, intimidating Bukele into letting him visit with, I think it was, I can't recall the details, but was it a U.S. legal resident who had been deported down there? I like Chris Van Hollen, but you know what? He's going to be in his 70s.
Wow.
He's going to be like just 70 in 2028. So F him. John Ossoff is, I think, going to be like 44. He's very charismatic, Kennedy-looking fella. And he's Jewish. And he votes against Israel. And he's a Southern senator. He's a charismatic senator. I mean, that gives me those Obama vibes. And he has, he's actually, he can't split the Democratic coalition because, Jewish folks are going to vote for the first Jewish president. But he's also anti-Israel.
So a bit like Sanders in that regard?
A bit like Sanders in that regard. And I think that he's also young enough that there's little that I've seen from Ossoff other than he votes against sending more weapons for a genocide. That's really excited me. But he's young and careerist enough, much like Buttigieg.
Does he come across well in speeches and that?
And I will use every tool at my disposal in the legislative process to defend you.
Yeah, he's pretty. He sounds smart. Okay. It's perfect. Yeah, I don't know. John Ossoff, man.
That's the one to watch?
That's my 2028 pick. Make it a full Georgia ticket, Ossoff, Warnock, Ossoff. I don't know. Maybe that'd be it.
Well, that's how the politics used to be in America, wasn't it? It'd be like a states. People would all go to run the country for a bit.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But usually I think the VP would be from somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, there's some precedent. Who knows? Of course, Georgia's still purple enough that maybe you don't want to like send away two, charismatic, amazing Georgia senators at once. But
in case something happened to them and Georgia was bereft. But okay.
Yeah, I don't know, man. John Ossoff sounds good to me. He's like, first Jewish American president, can give a speech, can talk, isn't pro-genocide. That sounds pretty amazing to me.
What are your odds that the Democrats will manage to drop the ball?
High, Rory. High.
That's bad. Just to go back to the economy. So the last quarter, America was at 2%, and it's gone to like a 0.2, I think. So that's quite a snap to go down 2 percentage points. So next quarter will be very interesting.
Next quarter, I like some of the stuff I'm seeing, Rory, is pretty apocalyptic. Like the
rumor I heard was all the big wigs from like Walmart and stuff were basically like, please don't do this. There's going to be empty shelves. Like, stop these tariffs now. So who knows what way the Democrats will have an election, and then if they do win, what they'll be handed.
Yeah, I expect, whether the Democrats drop the ball or not, I expect big Democratic victories in 2026 and 2028. But they can definitely drop the ball and still win, and keep us in this just sort of, well, nobody really knows what a party is for, and is the party for anything, and does anybody actually care about the American people, or are we just here to bomb the Middle East? And I think it's entirely possible the Democrats can both win, and I would argue that what the Democrats did in 2020 was win and drop the ball, and win by much less than they could have won by had they put anybody other than Joe Biden in. So, and that's the key thing here is like, yeah, like the Democrats can win with like, you know, somebody who's reasonably attractive and exactly the same platform, but they won't win by as much as they would if they actually come up with something new.
Is there a worry that if they do win, they'll squander it again, like Obama's first term, where it's like they could have done anything they wanted and they chose not to?
I go back and forth on like Obama. 100%, I think Obama personally, his decisions, his politics, he absolutely could have done more. But I do think that some leftists push that a little bit too hard. Like, he did have 60 people in the Senate. He did have a dominating majority in the House. But this was 2008. You know, this was long before. I mean, for most of 2008, people like actual economic orthodoxy was this thing called the efficient markets hypothesis that claimed, and everybody believed in this, that markets were perfect. Like, markets were genius.
Just find an economist that says the thing you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it was like the world like we lived in, and I'm an example. I was just, you know, I now see that Obama squandered an opportunity, but in my late 20s, early 30s, I was fairly politically knowledgeable, fairly politically active, and I thought that Obama was some progressive nightmare because I listened to too much, you know, right-wing nonsense. So, but that was just where we swam, you know, like the 80s and the 90s really confirmed like a deep pro-business fundamentalism, and it's been getting deeper with time. But like, I think even at the elite level, that consensus has been shattered by like 2016 in a way that even though the crises of 2008 were so massive, it just, people hadn't quite internalized what a failure of Reaganism and capitalism that was at that point. I certainly hadn't.
But the stock market was going
up. It took time.
That's all that matters.
It's all that matters, Rory. All that matters. And but that's actually a key thing, is that especially for elites, we figured out in 2016 that like a lot of that period for most Americans was pretty crap. The Obama years were, you know, like things got really bad in 2008, and then maybe people found another job after the 2008 financial crisis, but it wasn't a very good one. However, what Obama did figure out how to do was how to make the line go up. The stocks went down very low in 2008, and then, I mean, Scott Galloway is a famous, he's a NYU professor who now he's clearly working very hard to become big on the internet, and his current thing is the war on men, or like how hard it is to be a man out there or whatever. Not in like a men's rights way, like in a like people will actually have him on to talk about how sad it is.
Is he the manosphere sort of thing?
No, well, like not quite. He's more like it's really hard to date or whatever. Like, and he's the palatable version of that. But he's just a guy who wants to be big on the internet. But he does tell a great anecdote of like he became wealthy in 2008, like because the stock market crashed, and then he bought a lot in 2008, and across Obama, it went up and up and up and up. So if you were in that top 20% that could own stocks, you could say, oh, Obama years are great.
Buy the dip.
And it wasn't, buying the dip in 2008. And for friends of mine, buying the dip in 2008 is sort of how people went from sort of middle class or upper middle class to comfortably wealthy. So the Obama year is not so great for 80% of Americans, but pretty damn solid for the top 20%.
So here's hoping for Al Gore.
Anything's possible.
Anything's
Rory.
possible.
At this point, Rory, anything's possible.
All right, we'll catch you next time. Ciao, ciao.
All right. Thanks.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.